She walked into a federal courtroom in Baltimore in orange jail clothes, sat between her two attorneys, and immediately began talking. Not to answer questions, not to enter a plea, but to accuse the judge of being part of an organized crime ring. That was Ziz LaSota, the woman at the center of a body count that spans 4 states and 3 years. That was Ziz LaSota, the woman at the center of a body count that spans 4 states and 3 years. On March 12th, 2026, her own lawyer had just told the court that he wasn't sure his client was mentally competent to stand trial, and the judge agreed and ordered a psychiatric evaluation and effectively froze the federal case against the apparent leader of the most bizarre and deadly cult to emerge from America's rationalist tech subculture. And that's just one thread, because the Zizians aren't facing one or two or three trials. They're facing five, scattered across 3 states, with 7 members behind bars, an active death penalty case, and a web of connected violence that law enforcement is still trying to uncover. Now, I covered this and did a deep dive on the individuals involved last year. I will link that video here. But if you're new here, hello, hi, I'm Erin. Welcome to the show. And if you are returning, thank you so much. I am overjoyed to have you here. Now, since we last covered the story, every single legal proceeding has either stalled, delayed, or spiraled into chaos. And the question no one seems willing to answer is whether any of these cases will ever actually reach a jury. Now, to understand everything that's happened since I did that deep dive, you need to understand the legal map. Now, 7 Zizians are currently incarcerated or on supervised release in 3 states, facing charges that range from trespassing to capital murder, but none of them have been tried. Several of their proceedings are on indefinite hold, and the delays aren't coming from prosecution, they're coming from within. So let's start in Western Maryland, where LaSota, Michelle Zajko, and Daniel Blank were arrested in February 2025 after a property owner found them living in a box truck on a snow-covered dirt road outside Frostburg. All 3 were charged with trespassing, multiple gun violations, and possession of LSD with intent to distribute. Their trial was originally set for February of this year. But that didn't happen because in January, Zajko fired her attorney and briefly attempted to represent herself and then hired a new lawyer, and this all pushed the trial to June. Then in February, Blank posted a $15,000 bail and just walked out of the detention center, which makes them the first Zizian to be released since the group's arrest. Now, his conditions for bail were that he had to live alone and submit to GPS tracking, but the others still remain held without bail. But the real earthquake hit in March when LaSota's defense attorney filed a motion arguing that she was mentally incompetent to stand trial. Now, her lawyer cited what he called grandiose delusions in her online writings, her accusations against the judge, and her insistence on equating being a fugitive with being transgender. The court granted the competency evaluation and transferred LaSota to federal custody for the exam. Now, her federal trial, which was originally set for June 2026, is now almost certainly delayed indefinitely. The state charges in Maryland are frozen behind that. Now, at first, I was thinking this must be intentional. She must be playing a part. This must be something she's kind of scheming to delay the inevitable. But for her part, she disagreed with the whole thing, and she told the judge that her own attorney had confidently asserted to the court in previous hearings that she was competent, and she urged the court to review the full record. And then she said that she wanted to represent herself. So this kind of reminds me of this Sarah Boone case where it was just delayed like 6 times because she wanted to represent herself, and then she wanted a new lawyer, and then she couldn't afford a lawyer, so then she was asking for a lawyer. It's all just so just messy and jumbled. So Now we're going to take a little trip from Maryland to Vermont, where the stakes climb exponentially. Now, Teresa Youngblood, the 21-year-old former Seattle resident who was accused of fatally shooting Border Patrol agent David Maland during a traffic stop on January 20th, 2025, is now facing the death penalty. The trajectory of her charges tells its own story. Youngblood was initially charged only with the weapons offenses, using a deadly weapon against law enforcement and then discharging a firearm during an assault. Now, those charges didn't carry the death penalty. But the shooting happened on Inauguration Day, just hours before Donald Trump signed an executive order that lifted the Biden era moratorium on federal executions. Ex-Attorney General Pam Bondi subsequently cited Milan's death specifically in directing federal prosecutors to seek capital punishment in cases involving the murder of law enforcement officers. A superseding indictment followed in August 2025, charged Youngblood with murder and alleging for the first time that she fired that fatal shot. But she did plead not guilty in September. In court, her attorneys described her medical records as voluminous and disclosed that she was still receiving treatment for the gunshot wound that she ended up sustaining during the shootout. Her defense team fought hard to delay the government's death penalty determination, calling the timeline radically inadequate and extraordinarily rushed. Now, the judge denied that motion. But as of February 2026, the entire case has been paused. Both prosecution and defense jointly agreed that the complexity of a capital case made the existing timeline impossible, and the court granted a 180-day continuance. Discovery alone, the filing noted, is expected to be exceedingly large and includes material from investigations into other individuals across multiple jurisdictions. Now, the Youngblood case is not just about one shooting, it's about an entire network. The guns she and her companion Felix carried that day were purchased by Michelle Zaskow, the same one sitting in a Maryland jail, the same one named as a person of interest in the unsolved murders of her own parents. The man Youngblood planned to marry, Maximilian Snyder, is charged with murdering the California landlord whose testimony could have put other Zizians behind bars. So every thread connects back to the center, and the center is LaSota, who is now undergoing psychological evaluation. So, if we fly all the way across the country, and if all of this moving around doesn't show you just how much of a wild web this case is, like the deep dive is going to blow your mind. And it's also just like so heartbreaking that these people were so young and so radical, and the way some of the people involved identify, this behavior is going to make everybody else who identifies similarly look bad. It's just like, it feels to me like such a big case because we're seeing these young people involved in a cult murdering people because they think it's appropriate, and also living lifestyles that are currently being attacked by the government itself and by politicians. So it is just like heartbreaking. I'm saying all this because my last video, I kind of like focused on how LaSota was or is transgender. I didn't want to do that too much in this video, but just for context to why it kind of like extrapolates this even in a bigger way, because, you know, we have seen people weaponize the misbehavior of immigrants to generalize the entire immigrant population of America. And I just don't want this case to do the same thing to transgender people, because I just think any generalization like that is inherently dangerous. But, anyways, back to this web of a case. We're going to fly all the way from Vermont to California because there are two other separate but connected cases that are continuing to crawl forward. The first involves Suri Dow and Alexander Leatham, charged in the 2022 attack on landlord Curtis Lind. This is the assault that left Lind with a shattered skull, a samurai sword impaled through his chest, and the loss of his right eye. Lind actually survived that attack and shot two of his assailants and ended up killing Emma Burhanian. Dow and Leatham are charged with Burhanian's murder under California's felony murder rule. And their trial has also been postponed multiple times, and courtroom proceedings have been marked by Leatham's outbursts. Apparently, they're repeatedly shouting, "Curtis Lind murdered Emma Burhanian." And because of these outbursts, Leatham has been removed physically by deputies out of the courtroom, causing significant delays. Now, the second California case is more straightforward in its facts, but more devastating in its implications. Now, Maximilian Snyder, now 24 years old, is charged with the January 17th, 2025 murder of Curtis Lind, the same man who survived the 2022 sword attack. Now, I know that this is confusing, but this is what prosecutors allege happened. They think that Snyder stabbed Lind to death outside his property specifically to prevent him from testifying in the Dow and Leatham trial. So this landlord is attacked by Dow and Leatham. Someone is killed kind of in the crossfire. And so over the last couple years leading up to this, Snyder decides in this attempt to be a hero of his friends, he's going to go kill that landlord so that the landlord cannot testify in the trial and basically write a death sentence for the people who attempted to kill him in the first place. And I mean, this is a very, very specific and special circumstance. Snyder is accused of killing a witness to prevent their testimony. Now, as of this recording, Snyder's preliminary hearing has been, you guessed it, delayed. His defense attorney cited a scheduling conflict because co-counsel is currently in another homicide trial, so the judge pushed the hearing back to September 2026. So this means that the man accused of executing a witness to silence his testimony against other Zizians won't even have a preliminary hearing until nearly 2 years after the killing. So if we pull this back far enough, if we just zoom out, a pattern emerges that the legal system seems unwilling to really address. The Zizians don't function like a traditional criminal organization, and the fragmented approach to prosecuting them reflects that confusion. There's no RICO case, there's no federal conspiracy indictment. Instead, there are individual prosecutions in individual jurisdictions, each proceeding on their own timelines and each hampered by all of the other individual lawsuits. The Maryland case can't move forward until LaSota's competency is resolved. The Vermont case is paused for capital proceedings that could take years. The California cases are delayed by the very interconnections between defendants and witnesses that make the story so disturbing. And Daniel Blank, the one Zizian who has been released, is wearing an ankle monitor somewhere in America while the rest of this network is awaiting its fragmented reckoning. So the fundamental question hasn't changed since I first covered this case. How does a group of young, brilliant computer scientists, people who met through online forums about rationality and artificial intelligence, end up connected to 6 deaths across 4 states? Unfortunately, there's really no clarity on that quite yet. And if anything, the complexity of the legal proceedings is really burying the systemic questions that lie beneath the procedural delays. But considering what we know about recruitment, according to a former employee of the Center for Applied Rationality, LaSota specifically targeted smart, mostly autistic-ish trans women who were extremely vulnerable and isolated. And that is a quote. I don't usually use terms like autistic-ish, just so everybody knows out there. But LaSota drew followers through dense blog posts about AI risk, veganism, and gender identity. She conducted rituals that she called doom circles, in which members took turns sitting in the center of a group to receive harsh criticism that was framed as cognitive purification. She identified as a Sith. She wore a black cape, and she faked her own death in 2022 only to be found alive during a police investigation in Vallejo. But none of this is being examined in court. The charges on the table are weapons possession, trespassing, drug charges, and individual murder counts. The cult itself, its recruitment, its ideology, its mechanisms of control aren't on trial anywhere. And they may never be, but they should be. And what's so fascinating is this was a cult that thrived in this communal living situation, but then they all kind of branched out in this seemingly strategic way so as to not get caught for the crimes that they committed in another state. So it is just creating this like jurisdictional cluster of a situation where it's like there is no end in sight. And unfortunately, I feel like, especially at the state level, there is a general lack of understanding of the cult dynamic and what coercive control looks like. Some states, like New York and Georgia, are getting better as they have actually convicted cult leaders for using coercive control. So it does set a good precedence. But right now, the states aren't really considering the dynamic between all the members. And this could be because they're so interwoven yet separate at the same time. I'm literally just picturing like a spider's web, and LaSota is in the middle as the spider, and everybody else are like the flies that she captured. And they're all being held captive in these prisons for acts of violence that they conducted potentially under her guidance or under her like coercion after, months and months of believing that this was the only way out of escaping their other convictions that they were facing. It just feels so, so, so complicated. But as we move through all of these trials, I will definitely provide some updates for you all. I am so happy that these trials are moving forward. Hopefully, it allows for justice for the victims. I mean, I can't imagine bringing somebody into my home or letting someone rent a property of mine, and because they're like not adhering to the policies and procedures I laid out, they try to kill me. And then I think I'm going to get justice, but one of their cronies just ends up killing. Like, it's such a twisted scenario. And these were brilliant young people, they were smart. So if you're like, I don't get it, I'm lacking context, please go watch my deep dive. I will leave it down in the pinned comment too for easy clicking so you can check it out easily. But I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. I know that, and I think I was guilty of it in my last video, people sensationalize the gender identity and vegan lifestyle and communal living as if that's the most like sensational aspect of this story. But I do want to emphasize again that it's very, very important to not generalize a whole group of people based on one or two people's actions. In my opinion, all of these terrible things happened because of the cult mind, the group think that was going on. And all of the members were taking out these actions because they had been conditioned to believe that it was the only way to help save the world in some way. So, very curious to hear what you all think about this. I would love to see what your conclusions are. If you have any additional information, please share it in the comments down below. And again, I'll make sure to keep you guys updated as things progress in the legal system. So please. And look out for Daniel. Daniel is running around out there. So I'll make sure to put his picture up here and you can just stay away if you see them. Anyways, guys, thank you all so much. I really appreciate your time and your attention today. Stay safe out there, ask questions, and always stay skeptical. I'll see you in my next video soon. Bye.